Alright, hello everyone. My name is Chloe Kimmel, and today I'm going to be talking to you in a video called Addressing the Anthropocene. Will we be getting into the Anthropocene? Yes and no, I just liked the way the title sounded, but today I'm going to be talking about environmentalism and different schools of thought when it comes to environmentalism, and a little bit of what to do about it. This video is going to be super general, unfortunately, because of course limited amount of time, and I just want to give a really easy to understand overview of some different issues and ideas in environmentalism, and basically just introduce the topic and some of the problems that environmental theorists and people just in that world can face, because I feel like there's two different sides when it comes to a lot of ideologies. You have academics who sit in their schools and theorize and write academic papers for their academic buddies at other schools, and they all just read each other's work and kind of play off each other and really exist in those particular spaces. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have a lot of people on the internet, especially TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. They like to bring up a lot of these topics, which of course I do think is really important, but I think with bringing up these topics in these really short time frames, like in a tweet, in a post, in a 60-second video, you can run into a lot of oversimplification and lack a lot of nuance, and a lot of people care about these topics and want even more information about them and want to know what they can do about it, where the problems are, and what responsibilities we all have in addressing these problems and coming up with ideas that will also hopefully create short-term and long-term progress to creating a better world. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about environmentalism, ecology, and kind of the politics within that and the environment. We live in an extremely connected world. We all live on this earth, and the earth is just one place, like you might be from a certain country or certain area, but our actions can have global impacts whether or not they're political. The resources we use are not infinite. We have just this one earth that we can utilize and steward, create sustenance to survive. And in understanding that we all pretty much live in this one big house, we can understand that it's important we all need to work together and share responsibility for taking care of this house. And this house is really fragile, and we need to understand in this fragile house what's going to happen if we throw too many stones, so to speak, how we kind of steward this relationship, right? A lot of people, especially in my generation, want to see meaningful change, and it feels like a lot of times, no matter how much we talk about it, no matter how much the environment's in the public eye, it doesn't really feel like we are actually reaching meaningful change. And there are a lot of reasons for that are based in these ideologies and the roots of environmentalism to begin with. And yeah, there's a lot of reasons why sustainability is so different and difficult for nations to get on board with, Until Elon Musk and Grimes colonized Mars, this is the only place we got, so it's no secret we are at a really critical point in our climate. So it's important that we all can be as knowledgeable as possible and understand where things need to change and who's responsible for the situation that we are in and the continued perpetuated problems of this situation. Until Elon Musk and Grimes finally colonized Mars, this is the only Earth we got, so we really have to take care of it. Let's talk about what people actually do agree on. So there tends to be a general consensus that environmental destruction is bad, right? And ideally would be avoided. However, the priority of avoiding this destruction can of course vary greatly, especially in our capitalist, competitive-minded nature, especially when you're a leader of a country. Long-term effects of the environment might not be as important to you as your people succeeding on the global stage economically or politically or socially. That aside, humans for the most part see the natural world as valuable and something that inherently should be protected. Ecological futures are different potential visions for the organization of the relationship between different organisms and also between organisms and their environment. So when looking at the origins of environmentalism, a lot of indigenous communities and things like that have a very different relationship to the environment than us Westerners and First World or Global North people in power have a relationship to. So environmentalism itself is inherently First World and has come out of capitalism inherently, or is a direct response to capitalism. So I just want to make that clear, like, indigenous ways of thought and thinking are really important and they value the environment really greatly, but a lot of these schools of thought and philosophy of environmentalism is based out of Europe and the First World. So yeah, as ironic as it is, the emergence of global environmental awareness actually occurred through colonialism, which is a big reason why we are in this climate crisis. Colonialism has really taken industrialization and exploitation and exported it across the world and forced countries to feel this is the ideal, this is success, this is development, and capitalism itself is inherently based in this idea of abundance, of infinite resources, and of infinite growth. Growth always has to be the goal, and over a long term, this cannot be sustainable and is not compatible with the idea of a single Earth and this idea is not compatible with a single Earth with finite resources. At some point there is a glass ceiling, but even though this environmental global awareness came out of colonialism, problems with the environment are not new. Even though it may seem like it came out of the 17th and 18th century. It is important to note that humans have been creating and exerting influence with the environment ever since we started farming. This dates back a lot farther than just colonialism, but colonialism tends to be the point where it became truly unsustainable for the world as a whole, but there have always been problems with overexerting on different ecosystems and things like that. It is an inherently human problem. So with this colonial and capitalistic thinking in mind, you can also think of the environment as resources. Seems obvious, but it's an important distinction to make, right? The environment is where we get everything that we use to generate capital, pretty much, aside from like art and ideas and things like that, but the very foundations of an economy, things like that, our food, our clothes, our anything that you would buy at like a Target or a Walmart, we get from the environment. Sometimes, especially in this consumerist era that we're in, it's hard to make that connection between, oh, like this plastic toothbrush I got from the store, like did actually come from the environment somewhere, but because we don't connect those anymore because of how far away we've gotten from that, a lot of people don't connect their spending and their goods with their direct impact on the environment. So with this in mind, that environment equals resources is where we realize that protecting the environment means sacrificing some of our access in ways we manipulate the environment to get these resources. That is why it can be so difficult to create change, because as I said before, all humans can agree, oh, the environment is important, it needs protection, but I don't want to give things up, I don't want to decrease my profits when that resource is right there and I want to be on top, That's why meaningful change seems so unattainable, because these private companies aren't being held accountable by the government, and the governments are also not holding themselves accountable. So these ideas that the environment is important, but I don't want to have to overly change my lifestyle, actually has a specific term that ecologists and environmentalists use, and this is called Neoliberal Eco-Modernism. It's a really big word. I'm going to put it on the screen somewhere so we can kind of dissect that a little bit. So this ideology describes people who believe we can use capitalism and markets to adapt to climate change and create a more sustainable but continued economic growth. Most modern politicians and billionaires and business people likely fall into this category. I wouldn't say necessarily people, there's a scale. Climate deniers and people who truly don't care about the environment might be considered just true, pure neoliberals. This might be someone more like Donald Trump, or people who just directly disregard the importance of the environment at all. Neoliberal eco-modernists might be someone more like Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, Richard Nixon, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, people like that. In addition to these people holding this view, it also is a pretty predominant view culturally as well. This is the idea that governments should set a few incentives to our private companies, or maybe no incentives at all, maybe it should just work itself out, and that if it is advantageous to protect the environment, capitalism and the market will naturally adhere to this. A key part to this vision is that wealthier humans and just the top countries, the top 10% who hold all the wealth anywhere in the world should not have, the people who hold all the wealth, both in America and the global north and also the whole world, these people who disproportionately abuse and use resources should not have to change any part of their lifestyle in order for us to save the environment or protect it. Yeah, they don't want to have to sacrifice any part of their lifestyle or of their capital. Rather than develop a new economic philosophy, they propose sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the future of the next generations. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. This kind of idea hangs in midair and in reality exists in direct contrast with one another, leaving us stagnant and perpetuating this environmental problem. Furthermore, this idea of neoliberal eco-modernism externalizes all of the morality from the political economy of capitalism. They refuse to take responsibility for any of the consequences of ecological social destruction, which these capitalists, these politicians, and the top 10% are not ready or willing to pay. A good way to think of this is like, take a car company for example. They're not willing, they create all these cars, but they're not willing to pay or be responsible for the emissions created in creating these cars. You know, these emissions directly impact the environment, which affects the world as a whole, but they refuse to be held accountable for this, and governments refuse to recognize they should be held accountable for this. Modern politicians and billionaires hold a view that technology can solve all of our problems and that we can innovate our way to sustainability. As I said before, a lot of these ideas are built upon the proposition that there is no limit to growth. With capitalism, growth is an essential tenet, and ultimately they're far more focused on human interests than the planet's ability to fulfill those interests over a long term. They consider the future ability of generations in terms of economics, but what is the ability of generations going to be if we're facing a climate crisis and temperatures rise and things change and pollution is everywhere? That's going to affect our health too. There's a lot more factors than just economic ability. The next idea I want to talk about is called a new moral economy, and I will, also I'll be linking more resources below if you guys want to learn more about these different topics or just other good directions to point you in. Because it's really hard for me to be able to fit that much into this video. I really wanted to highlight this idea because I think it is, although idealized, a really great new way to kind of look at things and understand that the shift we need in order to protect the environment the best way we can has to be pretty drastic in our thinking. The old moral economy, based on subsistence ethics, was rooted in a more feudalist peasant idea. Again, indigenous communities would better exemplify this probably, but this is like a Western author and way of thinking, and again, I will link it down below. This old moral economy of peasants didn't compartmentalize or segregate the consequences between economics, social spheres, culture, and political or moral, but rather viewed them as one whole. This whole is called the whole house in this moral economy idea. The well-being of this whole house depended not on money income or external markets or inherent growth, but on the work of all who lived in the units and all the different spheres. This work was not motivated by the object of profit maximization, but by the need for a subsistence, security, and self-provisioning. This framework does not differentiate between good or bad, so to speak. These norms, obligations, and institutions were not inherently good or bad. This new moral economy likes to take morals out of it, but rather look at it as an obvious, something that's inherent, and because a lot of times getting caught up in these moral ideas actually can mess things up. They were, in this new moral economy, they were necessary, oriented human behavior in such a way that survival of all of the whole house was possible, even in times of scarcity. The morality of the moral economy was based on the realistic recognition of the ecological, social, and economic limits of a given community and the people living there. Also, in these ideas of the new moral economy, they recognize that poorer areas, underdeveloped areas in our world and in communities, even in well-developed societies, deserve to develop, but just because certain countries developed, like the United States and the West and stuff like that, developed in a specific way, doesn't mean that every country needs to go through that step, There isn't a linear development or progression. And while these underdeveloped areas and poor places deserve to develop and have that equity, they should not go about it by the same means. And a new moral economy focuses on degrowth and less growth, but they are not zero growth, and recognizing that different areas are disadvantaged and actually have, in the grand scheme of things, been taking up way less resources than these rich people who have been exploiting them. And this idea of this idea of these poorer countries and inequity in different areas of the world leads into the next topic that I wanted to touch on, which is environmental justice. So, environmental exploitation and crises disproportionately affect marginalized groups. Poisoned tap water in Flint, toxic waste dumps in Rio Grande Valley, a town in China where 80% of children have been poisoned with old computer parts. What do these things have in common? They're all examples of environmental racism targeted towards marginalized and underdeveloped areas. Also, I want to note, when I say underdeveloped, I mean more in the capitalist system and areas where resources are being extracted and the wealth is being diverted to other places. I want to make that really clear because I don't think that developed places are what these places should be, or what these underdeveloped places should be striving towards. It's just kind of the typical jargon. For examples of environmental racism, a form of systemic racism where communities of color are disproportionately burdened with the health hazards through policies and practices that force them to live in proximity to sources of toxic waste, such as sewage works, mines, landfills, etc. As a result, these communities suffer greater risks of health problems attendant on hazardous pollutants. So this also goes back to the neoliberal Eco-Modernism, where the capitalists aren't willing to take responsibility or have equity in the economic consequences of their actions. So they divert the environmental burden to marginalized communities and away from their consumers so they don't have to take accountability. Part of the blockage of change is that these consequences are diverted to communities with the least amount of voice and who have been historically and systemically oppressed. And so overall, in this new moral economy and thinkers who reject neoliberal eco-modernism, God, try saying that 5 times fast, all agree that a return to harmony with the natural world is what environmentalists believe will help humans live a good life. Not maintaining a certain lifestyle or economic status or economic growth, but living in harmony and living sufficiently with their foundational needs intact. I also want to add, on social media as well, there is a lot of pressure to shop sustainably and environmentally, and there's a lot of greenwashing these companies do to divert the consequences of their actions onto us, their consumers, when really we don't have a lot of control over how they produce their products, or we don't get to receive a lot of that knowledge of what actually happens in making the products that we buy. If you're not in poverty, but you're also not a millionaire or a politician, in our current system, very few of us actually have meaningful agency over the environment as well, even if you're not necessarily in one of these marginalized groups. So in a way, a lot of our consent is being taken away too over our say in the environment, despite it being a resource for all of us. Not all of us have a say in how it gets used. Our political system and private companies are the ones who have the most agency over our environment and abuse it without our consent. It's important that we are all aware the real perpetrators of the problem so we can make systemic changes to better incorporate the needs of our environment. The new moral school may seem idealistic and out of touch for many, especially in capitalism or neoliberalism, or even liberalism for that matter, but it is important that we educate ourselves on alternative ways of looking at the environment and seek great measures to prioritize our environment over our economics in order to create change. And it's also really important, I'm going to link some articles about something called Buen Vivir, which is a South American movement for the environment. And I think Buen Vivir is a great way of understanding that a way to prioritize the environment and still live a good life. You know, these companies, in order to gain money from us, have trained us to think, oh, if I can buy these things, like, I will be happy, I will live a good life. Oh, if I can become a billionaire like Bill Gates, like, that's living a good life, like, I can be one of those people. They create kind of this illusion that prevents us from living a good life in harmony with each other, with the animals around us, as well as with our environment. So yeah, I hope you learned something new through this video, or new understanding as well. And yeah, I'm not going to say that I have all the answers, but I just wanted to bring some education and knowledge on the topic that I have been privileged enough to get to learn, and kind of just add to this environmental discourse online. and also